So there's this internet meme that I really like, which shows this smiling anthropomorphic cartoon dog just casually drinking a cup of coffee while the room behind him is just engulfed in this raging inferno. And with this dead stare, the dog just looks at you, the viewer of the image, as a word bubble coming from his mouth reads, "This is fine. This is fine." A lot of times you'll see people post this image when they perceive that someone is ignoring a catastrophe. For instance, Jerry Jones failing to address glaring holes in the Cowboys roster. You may see the image of the dog saying, "This is fine." Politicians failing to address any number of the issues that they're elected to handle. Here comes the "this is fine" meme. Why is this funny? Of course not because a dog is drinking a cup of coffee so nonchalantly or because the room behind him is on fire, but a combination of the two. His indifference is comical. In real life, though, such indifference does not prove to be as humorous. Today I want to dig into our first reading and then our gospel reading. They have a very parallel structures and really tackle the same theme, the theme of indifference. In our first reading, the prophet Amos is criticizing the people of the northern kingdom of Israel for their complacency. They sit around on these comfy couches and they dine sumptuously and they live this kind of all-around bougie lifestyle, but at the same time, they're not bothered at all by the plight of the poor around them and the societal collapse around them. In our gospel, Jesus tells us of this rich man who dresses in posh clothing and he feasts every day, but he's so solely attuned to his own needs and his own desires that he ignores this poor man, Lazarus, who lays on his own on the doorstep of the rich man's house every day. In both of these readings, the sin being exposed is not merely the sin of having nice things. That in and of itself is not really a sin. Rather, the true sin is that of indifference, being so consumed in one's own affairs and pleasures that the pressing needs of others are ignored. It's not a sin to enjoy a nice cup of coffee, right? But it is a sin to enjoy a nice cup of coffee while the room around us is ablaze and threatens to consume everyone and everything in its path. It's a sin to blissfully enjoy what is good while we ignore those around us who are struggling or suffering. These readings today are so important, I think, because we are a culture that is becoming increasingly indifferent to the needs of others. No, I don't have overwhelming stats or anything to support this or science studies to back it up. I think it's just common sense, right? We as a society are becoming decreasingly involved in the lives of others on any meaningful level. We're experiencing just a breakdown in community and in face-to-face contact, in many ways due to the rise of social media and other forms of technology, which are really meant to increase communication, right? Bring us closer together, but in fact have the opposite impact. We are experiencing also a breakdown in marriage due to just kind of this postmodern social doctrine, which views such an institution as largely unnecessary for either happiness or for human flourishing. And of course, the breakdown of the family comes as a result of that. In 2019, the Institute for Family Studies reported that only 51% of high school seniors were living in a home with two parents. That's either married or cohabitating parents, only 51%. We're becoming more and more isolated in the way that we live. Even when we are together, it feels like we're apart. How easy it is to take out your phone and just disappear into your own private little world, even when you're around family and friends. I'm certainly guilty of it. I'm sure all of us can relate to this. Be sitting there, I should be talking to somebody, but I'm checking baseball standings on my phone or something, right? It's not good. It's not good. Because when we're isolated, the focus is on me and mine, right? That is the nature of isolationism. What is going on my island? What's happening within my borders? That's my only concern. And unfortunately, the answer to those questions right now is nothing good. Nothing good is happening. The isolationism that we have embraced has failed to embrace us in return. And instead, it's brought about a monumental increase in all sorts of problems, especially mental health problems. If you don't believe that, look at this country as we emerge from this COVID-19 pandemic. The organization Mental Health America tracked a 600% increase in internet searches regarding mental health help from 2019 through 2021. I can only imagine it's probably continued to go up since then. People are struggling. People are feeling isolated. And the more we feel separated from others, the easier it is to become indifferent to the needs of others. Now, you may be thinking, wait a second, Father Zach, as a church, don't we do a lot of charity work? Not just as a good shepherd, but as the church at large. Don't we do a lot of charity work? How could so many people feel isolated? How can so many people feel like they're victims of indifference when all of this good charity work is being done? And the answer to that is yes, Americans are largely a very charitable people, and Christians are statistically the most charitable single demographic in the entire country. Indifference to the physical needs of other people has never really been the problem. It's spiritual indifference. Spiritual indifference that's hitting us so hard. As we know, it's so much easier to give someone a loaf of bread or to write someone a check than to enter into their lives, right? And it's especially easy to detach when our culture increasingly tells us that we don't really need others to be happy. You don't need to have a wife or a husband. You don't need children. You just need yourself. Just need yourself. And this spiritual indifference, it's a pandemic of its own, and we need to take it seriously because it's so easy to fall prey to it. I think that there are three principal ways that we routinely, all of us, routinely succumb to indifference in our lives. And if we're honest, I think we can each probably relate to at least one of these, maybe two or all three. Firstly, we may find ourselves saying, I simply don't have what it takes to help other people on a spiritual level. I recognize, sure, that other people are hurting around me, but I can't be indifferent towards them if I'm hurting as well. After all, the sin of the rich man was that he had good things, but was still indifferent towards the suffering of Lazarus. Well, I don't have good things, so it's not possible for me to be indifferent. That's the first way we routinely fall prey to indifference. Secondly, we might find ourselves falling prey to this spiritual indifference by acknowledging people in need, acknowledging someone in need, but expecting that someone else will do it. Someone else will take care of their needs. This is the not my job mentality that creeps into our society. Somebody else will do this. Among priests and ministers, it's all but common knowledge that funerals can be especially difficult occasions. Of course, not just because we're mourning the death of a loved one, but because oftentimes in the wake of a death, there's so much blame to go around. So much blame to go around. You didn't do your part. You didn't check in on this person. You weren't the caretaker you should have been. And you're not checking on me to see how I feel now. This is what happens when a group of people, as small as a family or as large as an entire country, assumes that the duty to check on others falls to someone other than themselves. Someone else will check on that kid who sits by himself at lunch. Someone else will check on my neighbor whose wife died last year and he's living on his own. Someone else will ask how the guy in the cubicle next to me at work is handling his anxiety and depression. Thirdly, we might find ourselves falling prey to spiritual indifference by trying to avoid truly helping someone in need out of fear of confrontation or discomfort. This manifests itself in this desire to simply be passively nice instead of truthful or helpful. It's one of, I think, the great epidemics of our time. I was thinking about this the other day. Everyone in our culture talks about wanting to be nice, right? I just want to be a nice person. You'll hear that a lot. But what does that mean? I don't know if I would say Jesus was quote unquote nice, right? He was merciful, he was caring, he loved unconditionally, but I don't really know where we got this idea of nice as a supreme moral good. It's good to be kind, it's good to be politely disposed towards each other, of course, but what is our infatuation with this passive idea of being nice? It seems to me that we've used this idea of niceness to almost cover up for a certain degree of spiritual indifference. We, as Westerners, have created within our nations a culture of ambiguity by subjectifying truth and morality and the meaning in life. And then to make matters worse, we won't help anybody navigate this impoverished system of values with any true sincerity. We've willfully created a culture with no truth, with no objective sense of right and wrong, with no shared sense of past and future and destiny, with no communal sense of mission or meaning, and at the same time, we have no duty, no sense of duty to help people navigate all of this. We've created a minefield, a cultural minefield, and we're not helping each other to get through it in any meaningful way. And people are being victimized by this ambiguity and this indifference. And our only reaction to that is to try to be nice. Try to be nice, to just go along to get along. It's such a selfish thing, I think. It's very lazy. It says, I don't really care about you as long as I'm making myself feel like I did the right thing at the end of the day. We live in this world of empty affirmation, right? Affirm, affirm, affirm. It's all we're taught to do constantly. You struggle with discomfort. You struggle with discomfort in your body image. Well, let's just tear it apart, right? Let's build you a new one. That'll solve it. You can't find work or a spouse because you drink too much and you can't hold down a job. Well, let's go to the club. You need to take your mind off things. Let's go have a fun evening. You're suffering from horrible health issues because of your weight, or because you're a smoker, or because you do drugs. That's all right. You just do you. Just be happy. Just be happy. That's what's important. It's all fake help. It's fake help. It's like tossing someone a life raft that has no air in it, right? I'm handing you into the jaws of subjective morality, subjective moral good, into nihilism, but at least I was nice. At least I was nice. Good for me. All three of these pitfalls perpetuate spiritual poverty. When we sow these seeds of selfishness, it yields more and more selfishness. We say, nobody went into the trenches with me when I was hurting, so why am I going to go into the trenches with anybody else? We're all guilty of this as a nation, but I think we are especially guilty of it as Christians, because this is exactly the type of thing that Jesus warns us about. Christianity is declining in our country right now. No surprise. Experts predict that only 30% of our country will identify as Christian by the year 2070. I believe it. I believe it. Many Christians live in spiritual indifference, as if the hope that we have in Jesus doesn't matter, or even worse, only matters to me. And I don't care about anybody else. It matters to me, but I don't care what anybody else is doing. We pass this sentiment on to others. No one feels seen or feels that someone has invested in them, and then that suffering, it spreads like a contagion. We establish this great chasm between ourselves and others in the way we live, and that chasm is the chasm of indifference, and if we're not careful, it will follow us all the way to eternity. If we separate ourselves from others and from the love of God in this life, we'll be separated also in death. That's what Jesus tells us in this parable today. But here's the good news. Unlike this family of the eternally condemned rich man in our gospel, we have seen the one risen from the dead. And that is not the man, Lazarus, it's Jesus Christ the Lord, true God and true man. And he tells us that he is the way, he is the truth, he is the life. If we follow his example, we can destroy this chasm of indifference, both in this life and in the life to come. As creatures, we're called to live by the example of our Creator, who showed no indifference to the sufferings of his people, but rather entered into that suffering in order to relieve it. And therefore, we are similarly called to reject spiritual indifference in our own lives. So instead of lamenting our own brokenness and allowing it to be the reason that we fail to invest in the lives of others, we need to see ourselves, as the Dutch priest Henry Nouwen put it, wounded healers, those who do not let their own sufferings keep them away from others, but rather draw them deeper into the lives of others, deeper into solidarity with others. Instead of searching for someone else to enter into the darkness of people's lives, we need to be the ones to do it ourselves. See the ostracized student, see the lonely neighbor, see the depressed colleague, and ask yourself, if not me, then who? If not me, then who? Instead of simply affirming people to feel personally validated by feeling quote-unquote nice, don't be afraid to challenge them. Don't be afraid to question them, guide them through the moral confusion of our time. God knows we all need that. We're called to be prophets. Christians especially are called to be prophets. We're the ones that should be showing the rest of the world that Jesus died and rose to bridge that gap, that chasm that separates the wealthy from the poor, the comfortable from the afflicted, and even the afflicted from the afflicted. Let us never become indifferent, but remember that as followers of Jesus, we're called to simply be different, right? Not indifferent, but different. We're called to turn away from that nice cup of coffee on occasion and realize that the room behind us is on fire. We're called to turn attention away from our own lives and enter into the lives of others.